STEM City USA Healthy Doses series is your passport to a balanced lifestyle. Hosted by Dr. Tiffany Anderson and presented in the Boston Scientific Auditorium. And now, Dr. Tiffany Anderson.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rayondon Kennedy, and this is another episode of Healthy Doses, brought to you by Boston Scientific. Healthy Doses is a show that we created to give you, our audience, the resources and the tools needed to achieve and maintain great mental health. And so I want to introduce you to the person who's going to help us get there, our host, Dr. Tiffany Anderson.
Hello, thank you, Ray. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Healthy Doses. So today we are tackling imposter syndrome. So some of you may have never heard of it. Some of you may be very well versed in this area. But first, I just want to start with a quick visualization, right? So I'm going to slowly walk you through this. So close your eyes. All right. So think back to a time where you worked extremely hard at something, right? You put in the hours, the tears, the sweat. Like you really wanted to accomplish something. You did the work, and you accomplished it, right? You accomplished it because that's generally how hard work works. But think about any feelings that you had about being a fraud, or that you weren't deserving of that experience or those accolades. Think about a time where you accomplished something and when folks started to pour into you, you felt like you weren't deserving of it. Just hold that image in your mind. Hold that time in your mind. Keep holding it. All right. And after this commercial from our sponsors, we're going to dive right back into it.
All right. So welcome back. Thank you to Boston Scientific for that wonderful message. So we're about to dive into the imposter syndrome, like you teed up, Dr. Anderson. But real quick, a couple of quick things for everybody watching. In the top corner of your video, you see a QR code. If at any point throughout this conversation you have any questions for Dr. Anderson, take your cell phone, scan that code, and go ahead and just leave us a message. If you're watching in a STEM City auditorium, I want you to be able to communicate with others who are watching. So there's going to be a chat button on the side, and I want you guys to utilize that and really engage with each other, and just let us know what you feel about the show. Leave us any comments if you're feeling it, if you're not feeling it, and just interact with us. We'll be interacting with you. Dr. Anderson, you teed up, a visualization exercise. And I really want to dive in because, several things popped in my head. So I'm excited and I'm ready to kind of jump in.
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to start you off. All right. And so like when we were talking about that visualization, right? We are deserving of the accolades, right? We worked hard. We did everything we could and we accomplished our goals. What we're finding with imposter syndrome is that we still don't feel worthy of the accolades, right? We still don't feel worthy of these accomplishments because there's something internal that says we're not worthy of them. So, just to define it, right? So, we're on the same page. So, imposter syndrome is feelings of self doubt and personal incompetence surrounding one's accomplishments, education, or experience. So, you see this a lot in high achieving individuals, although it impacts all of us. Research back in the 1970s first started in high achieving women. And that's where it started. And we started to notice it that these women were not feeling worthy of their accomplishments. And they had this belief that it wasn't their hard work, perseverance, or dedication that got them to that point, but it was pure luck or external factors, right? Like good timing. Um, and so it's this idea that an individual can't internalize their accomplishments, right? That they can't take it in and say, I did the work and that I am receiving the fruits of my labor because I am worthy of it. And I, in fact, work towards this, but it's just simply because it just happened.
So let me just kind of recap that. I guess from my own personal experience, my mind speaks in X's and O's, right, from an athletic perspective. So there was a time when I was in high school playing football, and as a sophomore, so underclassmen, if you will, for high school, and I was able to get called up to the varsity level, right? Varsity, older guys, big guys, bigger, stronger, faster. And but I had the opportunity to go up and kind of participate with that level, and I put in the work. I was training, I was doing everything I was supposed to do, hence why I got the promotion, if you will. And there was a sense of like, I don't belong here, and when you do that, you move slower, you're not moving as fast as you think because you're second guessing everything. Is that a good example of imposter syndrome? Like, you put the work in, you're supposed to be there, you're there for a reason, but you still feel like you don't belong.
That's the beautiful example. And I'm sure a shared example for many athletes. Like I said, high achieving individuals, that's where you see it the most. It disproportionately affects high achieving individuals. And that is the example, right? Like, you worked hard enough to even become, as a youngster, become varsity, right? That's a huge deal. But it's a part of you that that not only feels like a fraud, it's like a phony, like a
Yeah.
fake. Like, somehow they made a mistake and they chose me,
Yes.
right? Not that I put in the work, not that I am just as good or better, but simply just by, like I said, either good timing or by chance. Like, it just happened and I got lucky. You see that a lot where folks are like,
Yeah.
"Oh, I got lucky," um, and has a difficult time like shining light on how hard they worked. So that's a great, 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 great example. I have one for you. I have plenty of stories, but I'm gonna save a few just for today. Um, Another one for me was when I had first started my Ph.D. Degree. I just felt like the biggest fraud. A lot of folks in the program were a lot older than I was, right? I was a youngster, I was a baby. A lot older, did not look like me necessarily, including the administration. And I just felt like I did not belong at all. Again, worked hard, overachieved my entire life, all of those things. But in that moment, um, I felt like at any moment they're gonna like point at me and be like, "How did you get here? You don't belong here." And so it was a lot of internalized suffering and definitely suffering in silence, because I didn't have a name for this. I didn't know what this, looked like exactly. I just knew that something felt like I didn't belong. And so I'm just happy to be in a position now to give it a name for so many people, because at the time that you and I were suffering, we didn't know what to call it.
Yeah. So my question is, where does this come from, right? Because, both of us just talked about it, PhD student. You obviously put the work in, you got into it, you got into the program.
Right.
I put the work in, I got the call up, I didn't pay anybody or do anything. Like, they called me up, right? They saw something in me that meant I belonged there. And I'm sure there are many people out there who have been in situations where, they did what they were supposed to do and they got what they wanted, but now all of a sudden you got it. So tell me, like, where does this come from? Like, obviously the credentials are there. What makes us doubt, when you can go back and you got the evidence, like you got the proof of that this is where you're supposed to be. So tell me a little bit, where is that coming from?
Yeah, some causes. Well, I think a big one, to be honest, for many brown and black folk is just the lack of representation overall in certain spaces, right? Where you don't feel like you belong here because there's not folks in those spaces that actually look like you and then indirectly kind of inform that you indeed belong here because look at me, right? A lot of us are the first, yeah, the first this, the first that. And in society, for many of us, we're told directly or indirectly and socialized to believe that we aren't good enough, right? So we're naturally coming from a place of kind of deficit. And so a lot of us are just naturally having to work 10 times harder, right? But even when working that hard, we still find ourselves questioning our worth. So that's really a generalized kind of idea for many of us of where it starts. But then there's other causes, of course, right? So we have parenting styles. If you come from maybe like a competitive um, home environment or certain parenting styles that may be controlling or overprotective, may contribute to the development of imposter syndrome in children. So we have to be aware of that. For example, if we come from a family that highly values like achievement, or parents who kind of flip back and forth between offering praise and being critical, right? Where growing up, you feel as if, okay, I have to work hard, but when I do, it's still not enough. Does that make sense?
It
Sometimes
does.
I praise, but when I don't do well, I'm criticized. So it can really kind of develop in the sense of perfectionism that we have to be careful about, that I definitely deal with and have to manage all the time. Um, and then we have personality, like certain personality traits influence, imposter syndrome. So we have the folks that tend to, kind of stick to this sense of perfection, right? Which plays a significant role in imposter syndrome. Um, because you may think that there's a perfect way of being when there's not. So when you believe that, you're always going to fail. Does that make sense? Because there's no such thing as perfection. You're just trying your best. And then we have social anxiety, right? Can influence imposter syndrome, and this idea of, just not feeling like you belong in certain social and performance situations. Um, oh, new work environments. Think about a time, Ray, where you were introduced to different work environments where you were nervous or uncertain, and it got to a point where you felt like I don't belong here, similar to the experience that you shared earlier. They talked about kind of feeling as if you're not capable, starting college, starting a new university, starting a new job. You may find that imposter syndrome will show its ugly head.
Yeah. There's a bunch of times like that I can think of. Dr. Anderson, you said something, and I want to kind of take a couple steps back and kind of drill down on it when we were talking about minorities. And my question is imposter syndrome more prevalent in certain demographics, whether it's Black, Hispanic, Asian women, or LGBTQ community, or does even majority populations experience it? So, or is it, yeah, so that's, I guess that's the question. Is it more prevalent in minorities as opposed to the majority, or do we all experience it at the same rate?
That's a great question. So, imposter syndrome does affect anyone, no matter their social status, background, skill level, degree, or expertise, right? We all kind of experience it, but we do experience at different degrees and different levels. So, what I was speaking about earlier with the research is we found that, or they found that it was first documented with high achieving women in the 1970s. What we're finding is that Black women specifically are impacted the most at this point in the research with imposter syndrome. That's most likely because they don't see many, we don't, I can speak for myself as well. We don't see many examples of people who look like us or share our backgrounds who are clearly succeeding in our fields. And so, on top of just being a woman, right, and experience sexism, you also have intersectionality, where being a Black woman and experiencing sexism. Then we add racism, and then there's other identities that we add on to that, right? So when we naturally experience systemic oppression, we're directly or indirectly told kind of our whole lives that we're less than or don't necessarily belong or undeserving. So that goes against this longstanding narrative in our mind that we belong here, because naturally we feel as if we don't. So it's just kind of this back and forth of confusion, and that's why we have to work extremely hard to combat it, because if not, it's just a natural reaction when we are experiencing grand accomplishments.
I have a question for you.
Of course.
We are, as a culture, really starting to embrace and highlight the importance of mental health. Hence, the show Healthy Doses. Has imposter syndrome always been around, or is this kind of a new concept, or are we just now kind of defining what it is? And I guess in that same kind of questioning, how has technology, social media kind of impacted, our self-confidence, and, how does that impact imposter syndrome?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would argue that it's been around for long time, years and decades. However, what we're seeing is that the research about it, like I said, came in around the 70s. And there's a lot more research that I do believe needs to be done. And I just found out about imposter syndrome within the last, I would say, 7 years. So that's a great question. Yes, it's new, but it's been around for a very long time. And we are just now really diving into it. And I think bringing light to it, because the 70s wasn't too long ago. However, what you're seeing is more folks talking about it now. I remember speaking with my aunt, who's an MD in LA, and I was explaining to her about my own imposter syndrome, and she had never heard about it. And so as I explained to her what it was and what it looked like, she shared with me that she also shared similar experiences, but she never had a name for it. So that was really a beautiful conversation, because we were both able to share our own lived experiences and recognize that the research has helped give this thing a name, and has allowed us to begin to make some necessary changes around how we think about our own worthiness. And then you asked another question, that social media question. I don't want to skip over that, Ray.
Yeah. I was going to bring you back.
Yeah. You know how to follow up. So thank you. I remember. So social media, actually, what we're finding in the research is they're specifically saying stay away from it. If you are dealing with imposter syndrome, they're saying limit your social media access, because what we're finding is that we're constantly comparing our accomplishments and what we're doing in life to other people. So if we're naturally unable to internalize our accomplishments, imagine looking at other people's accomplishments and watching them celebrate their accolades and watching them accomplish things over and over. And you're still struggling to believe that you are even capable and worthy of doing the same thing.
I'm glad you said that, because that's kind of leading into my next question. So you're saying, if you recognize you have imposter syndrome, probably one of the worst things you can do is go online and look at everybody else posting on social media. And I know social media is a whole nother conversation, probably a whole new episode that we can
Yes.
do just on the effects of social media. But people only post on social media the best of the best, right? Whether they faking it or it's actually, like, you don't see, too many of the down moments. And so social media kind of, what's the word, exacerbates the imposter syndrome within you. And so, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So that's tip one, I guess, is to stay away from social media, because there's no real good that really comes from that. But my question is, so I've identified, I'm listening to you, Dr. Anderson, and I've identified, I have imposter syndrome. I'm in a place right now where I feel like I'm phony. I feel like I don't have the rights to be there, even though I've earned the right to be there.
Mm-hmm.
What can I do? What are treatment options? Because this is not like I don't want to say a normal diagnosis, but it's not something that you can treat with medicine. So what are some things that we can do to kind of overcome our imposter syndrome? Like, how can we tell ourselves that we belong?
I love how you said it's not something we can treat away with like medication, because that leads to really understanding that imposter syndrome is not a diagnosis, right? You're not going to find it in the DSM-5. That's not where we are when it comes to imposter syndrome. We can weigh out our options, good or bad. I'm just delivering the information. It's not a diagnosis. So no one's going to diagnose you with imposter syndrome as a disorder, is what I mean. So when thinking about that, think about these questions, right? What are the core beliefs that I hold about myself? Think about that, right? What are your core beliefs that you hold about yourself? Do you believe that you are worthy of love? Must I be perfect for others to approve of me? I think those are important questions to ask yourself first, because if you're struggling with those answers, we can then begin to tap into how imposter syndrome is manifesting in your life and where it may even start from. Where's the root cause? Because if we don't believe that we're worthy of love, or if we believe we have to be perfect for others to approve of us, of course, certain accomplishments, if not all accomplishments, you may feel like a fraud after. Because this is belief that you have to be doing for others to love you, or accomplishing something for others to see you and to praise you. So first, I think those are great questions to first ask yourself and truly kind of dive into. Then next, you asked about, like, how are we supposed to cope with something like this? The good news is that it is definitely something we can manage. Like I said, I shared my experiences with you all in the early parts of my Ph.D. The good news is I'm nowhere near that younger girl that felt that way, right? There are ways of managing it. And the big way is really changing your mindset about your own abilities, right? So you want to measure your own achievements instead of comparing yourself to others. Similar to what Ray and I were talking about with social media. We want to reality test. What have I done? how did I get here? Did I put in the work? Did I put in the hours? Was I determined enough to do everything I needed to do to get here? If that is the case, that is your reality, right? So we want to make sure our mindset is aligned with what we're in fact doing. So we know that we're not a fraud, because it's kind of hard to get to where we are and be a fraud, right? Next, Ray, you want to really kind of break that silence. So you know how you shared your story earlier, which was the first step, right? You want to break that silence. You want to talk to folks about how you're feeling. You want to recognize that you are not alone, and you don't have to suffer in silence about this thing called imposter syndrome. And oftentimes you find, like I did with my aunt, that a lot of people have experienced this at least one time in their life, and they're in places where they can relate and connect with you in many ways. You want to separate feelings from fact, right? I feel like I'm a fraud, not in real life. I'm just speaking, right? I may feel like I'm a fraud, but the fact is I put in the work, right? These are feelings compared to the actual facts. I put in the work, and I am deserving of being in this space. We talked about that social media. We want to use it sparingly or not at all, but we want to be careful about comparing ourselves to others. And we want to highlight our positives. We want to highlight when we are doing anything, no matter big or small, right? We want to really celebrate our wins and give ourselves the praise that we deserve.
You said a lot, Dr. Henderson,
Yeah.
but it was a lot of tools. So let me see if I can recap some of these. So one, break the silence, right? You are not alone. I guess that's the power of the imposter syndrome, is kind of isolating you and making you feel like you're a phony, but speaking it out loud, either to somebody that you look up to, a parent, a mentor, somebody who can reinforce that, like, you're supposed to be here, right? Or just realizing that you're not the only person having these feelings, and now you have strength in numbers, if you will, right? Yeah. And so you have to voice it. You have to, like, say it. I get that. That's very, very important. Other thing you said, separate feelings from fact. Make a realistic assessment of what you've done, your accomplishments, right? Biggest piece, and I stand behind this because I know social media is really powerful in our lives, but there's a lot of facades, if you will, mirages on social media, but your brain interprets it as real because you see all these positive things from other people, and now you're comparing, and now you're feeling less than what you've done. And then Dr. Anderson, I forgot you had one more.
Oh, I was just saying
Highlight, yes.
Well, like, reward yourself, like the big wins, but also the small wins. And I think what you're saying about social media, Ray, is that folks aren't highlighting small wins on social media. They're highlighting the big stuff, right? That makes it feel like their life is always going well. And so if we're, like you said, that's a distortion. That is not real. And so for us, we want to do our own work and highlight the small wins, the things that don't necessarily get other people involved. Because remember that question, do I have to accomplish something to feel loved or to feel heard, right? And so we want to get into the habit of praising ourselves and not waiting for other people to do it for us.
Yes. Dr. Anderson, I have another message from our sponsors, Boston Scientific. And so what I want to say to you, to the folks who are watching, we want to hear from you. Like, if you have a story, if you scan that code, it's completely anonymous. We won't know who sent it. But if you want to share your stories, I'll read them off the air. Or if you have any questions or anything that you want to follow up with that's based on this conversation, use that QR code in the corner. Take your phone, scan it. And we'll see if we can work it in. I do have some questions that have come in, but we'll get right back to that. Also, Dr. Anderson, I do have another question from me that I thought of that I want to run by you.
Okay.
So we'll be right back after this message.
We know how to treat the colds and the coughs. We know how to treat the bumps and the bruises. the cuts and fractures. But how do we treat? I can't afford a day off work to see a doctor. How do we treat? I've never had a doctor who speaks my language. How do we treat? I don't know how to connect with some of my patients. How do we treat? You're not listening. We can't treat what we cannot see. So we have to look closer and see what we're missing. People, patients, misdiagnosed, misunderstood, overlooked. These are the people left out of a system charged with helping them. And it's up to us to find them in our communities, in our relationships, in our data. We're meeting them where they are, discovering who they are. We're taking an honest look to understand their healthcare needs and delivering effective ways to reach them. We don't have all the answers, but together we can find the way to address the gaps in our healthcare system, to provide something better, to find more chances to save more lives. It won't be easy, but we can help make it right, because no one should be missed.
All right, everyone. Welcome back to Healthy Doses. We're talking about imposter syndrome today, and right now we're about to enter into our Q&A session where you, our listeners, can really ask us questions. Or I say us, ask Dr. Anderson the questions about the imposter syndrome. Anything that you may, or if you just want to share your story, use that QR code. And it will be completely anonymous. And for those of you who are in the STEM City metaverse, I hope you're having a good time. And I really hope you're utilizing that chat button that's on the side where you can really engage with everybody else who is watching the episode. So make sure you're using those tools. Make sure you're communicating with us because we want to hear from you. Dr. Anderson, you had said something that triggered a question in me before we went to that break. And this question is kind of pertaining to people in leadership positions, right? Our managers, our bosses, our CEOs. So earlier I talked about my experience with imposter syndrome, right? Being called up to the varsity level at a young age. And the confidence in athletes is all about being sure what you're doing and being able to react fast, think fast, be able to operate at a fast pace, right? Because that's the difference between making a play or not making a play. Same thing with your work, right? Knowing what you can do, being confident and being able to execute at a high level. When you have imposter syndrome, that's one of the effects. It takes that quickness away, makes you slow, makes you second guess yourself, and ultimately you're not performing at the highest level that you can. So when we talk about maybe a workplace setting, now, if everybody's running around, we just talked about how prevalent imposter syndrome is in the mass population of people. So I would think as a boss or CEO or manager, you would want to eliminate imposter syndrome as much as possible for your team so that you're all operating at high levels. Mm-hmm. What are some tips that you have for upper management to help keep imposter syndrome down in their teams?
That's a great question. And I wanted to add to with imposter syndrome, it depends on the individual, Ray. Some, it may absolutely impact their performance, but many, it doesn't necessarily impact their performance, right? So even when we're dealing with imposter syndrome, we may be doing an excellent job, right? The way some folks even respond to imposter syndrome is as if it's like fuel, like it drives them to do a great job. But that's when you run into overcompensating. That's when you run into pushing yourself harder than you need to. That's when you run into getting to a place where it's like you're working in an unhealthy amount of hours with no breaks and no stops. And so, again, high achieving. Some it can slow down, but many, it drives them to just keep going without any stops. And so for leadership, for upper management, they may look at that and say, like, thanks, like this person is great. That's why I think this is a great question, because I think it is important for upper management to be able to identify that although someone is excelling, it does not mean they're not suffering. So we need folks in leadership roles to check in and to recognize that it's not necessarily just about numbers, because this individual can be excelling well, but burnout is also real and can happen where you find out that they're not, that something has changed, or they're not the same hardworking individual that they were, because they maybe experience extreme burnout. So some tips I would just say, just from the research, is checking in. Are we doing, what does our meetings look like? Are we simply talking about the numbers? Are we simply talking about, how this person is bringing money to the business? Or are we asking personal questions about how are you feeling? How is the work driving you? Positive, I think positive affirmations are also very important. Because this person, again, has having difficulties internalizing their success. So I think that's also important. But I think a good questions that actually dive into the person's lives. I think so much with business, and not that this is therapy or anything like that, but it's really asking, how are you feeling? How are you doing with the work? Are you overworked? Is there any way I can support you? And we want to make room for these individuals to be comfortable enough and feel safe enough to talk about what they're dealing with. Remember, we talked about breaking the silence?
Mhm.
You want to have that in upper management, if that is the type of business you have, where folks feel comfortable enough to come to you and say, this is driving me to an unhealthy place, and I would love to get help in this area. And if that's having meetings and just checking in and supporting me and helping me realize that what I am doing is in fact good enough, and that, what I'm bringing to the company, that you all are satisfied with, and that I don't have to feel as if I have to work even harder to get approval or praise.
Thank you for that, Dr. Anderson. So I do have a couple of questions for you that I'm just about to pop up on the screen here. And this was something that was asked. Are there key triggers, or is there a certain age? And this is something that came to mind earlier in the conversation. So I'm really thankful for whoever asked this question. But is there a certain age that people are more prone to getting it, right? Kids usually are happy-go-lucky, worry-free, and kind of doing it. But is there a certain age where we start to see imposter syndrome start to manifest?
That's a good question. I'm not sure if there's a certain age, but like I was saying, we're starting to see it a lot in children. And I already kind of listed the reasons,
Mhm.
specifically that household stuff, right? Upbringing, if you may have, like we said, where achievement is very, very important, or you have parents that kind of flip flop between praise and criticism back and forth. But, I don't know if there's a specific age. I, no, I don't know if there's a specific age, but I was thinking of just myself personally. I think it's always been there. I think I was able to identify it later on in life. But I think that high achieving, and you know what, right? We see this in school though as well. We see, certain kids get certain awards in classes when they achieve, and then the other students may not. So it kind of calls into question how academics can influence imposter syndrome as well. But I'm not sure if there's a certain age, but we are definitely seeing it in children, and it may start a lot younger than we think.
I got a curveball question for you, Dr. Anderson. While we're talking about,
So let's go ahead and go ahead.
it's sports analogies, X's and
Yeah.
O's. When we talk about kids, because we were just talking about school-age kids and how imposter syndrome affects us as adults. Does it affect kids in the same way? So, right, they might have the feelings, right? They might have an older sibling or somebody who they think they're trying to live up to, and they might not feel as have that high self-esteem, or they're trying to live up to a certain. But does it affect their performance the same way it would affect an adult who is experiencing imposter syndrome?
That's a good question. I'm not exactly sure how that would look, to be honest. I think we just know with adults, they just have more of a language to kind of express what's happening, whereas children may not. So it may be with children, we may see more, like I said, suffering in silence, where they may maybe be acting out emotionally or frustrated, or, even thinking about the way they approach homework. We may see that in certain children where they already feel defeated before they start, right? Where they're like, I can't do it. That may be a question of, is it their ability, or do they already feel so defeated that they don't even want to try, right? I think, what we find with adults, they necessarily don't have the same kind of, their acting out may look differently. And that was something I was thinking about with imposter syndrome, because we talk a lot about high achieving folks, although we know it happens for everyone. I think about the individuals that have imposter syndrome that prevent them from trying new things, right? Where they don't even start because they believe that they're incapable of doing it, or that they're unworthy of receiving, this type of accomplishment. I think about those type of things where that acting out potentially in children can look like that, but you also see that in adults, right? So that's a great question. And I think with this topic of imposter syndrome, there's still a lot more research that needs to happen on it. Like I said, it's not a disorder. It's, just came out in the 70s, where we gave language to this behavior and to this experience. So I think it's great to really kind of look at what that may look like in more children, because a lot of the research is based on adults.
Thank you for that, Dr. Anderson. I have another question, and I really like this because, one thing that we've done in the past shows is kind of flip the perspective. And we touched on this a little bit when we were talking about upper management. But we've been talking about imposter syndrome kind of from a first-person point of view so far this show. Yeah. Now, what if you're a big sister or a family member, right? How do you recognize imposter syndrome in somebody else, and what can you do to help? Like I said, we talked about this a little bit from the manager perspective, but what about from a family member or a friend, or you recognizing it as somebody else? What are some things you can do to help?
Yeah, I think a big one is becoming an ally or support for that individual, right? So some telltale signs is kind of listen to folks' language. Listen to how individuals respond when you congratulate them, because that is a trigger for someone with imposter syndrome. That when you go up to them, congratulations, and they're they kind of shy away, or they minimize it, or it's like, oh, it was luck, or I didn't do anything, right? That's kind of a telltale sign that someone may be potentially suffering with imposter syndrome. So first we need to kind of identify if they are or not. And we can simply ask the question about, what does that mean? Do you feel worthy of this accomplishment? Are you struggling with accepting the good in this? Like asking questions to really identify if there's something going on, or sharing your own story. Because remember when I was speaking about my aunt and I was sharing my own story, and it came up for her where she recognized that she also dealt with it. So I think that's a big way, love, is being vulnerable, sharing your own story, and giving people space to then share theirs. And then sharing what has helped you. And so the big part of that is that mindset. It doesn't necessarily have to come from therapy, but it can, where your therapist is able to tap into that negative self-talk and those cognitive distortions and really kind of align it with your reality. And so you're able to identify the actual, like I said, fact from feeling, where you're able to identify the facts, but process out those feelings. Where is it coming from? What are the questions that we're asking ourselves? Remember, I asked about worthiness. Do I have to perform to be seen or to be loved? right? Where we're really asking those questions. And then another part of it is just being an ear for that person. Whew. Allowing them to know that they're not alone in this. And again, I breathe because I am this person. I get it. I had great, well, we call ourselves sisters now, but great colleagues in my PhD program that, that really sat with me and talked to me, and they too shared their story. We recognized that we weren't alone. So those conversations, those heart to hearts, are healing. They're extremely healing. So a lot of it is just being an ear and not making a judgment about how they're experiencing imposter syndrome, and then reminding them that they are worthy of everything they've accomplished.
Thank you for that, Dr. Anderson. And I have the next question, which I think you're really going to enjoy, because I know how like your faith and spirituality is a large part of the way you operate and kind of work with people. And so and on the topic of imposter syndrome, how does your faith in a higher power reinforce the confidence in your God-given abilities, right? He gave you these abilities. He gave you the blessing for where you are. So what is that? What is that? How does faith affect that?
That's a great question. And working with individuals and their spirituality / religion is definitely something I've been trained in with my PhD, right? Understanding how one's spirituality impacts who they are and their overall well-being. So a lot of this is, a lot of folks find their sense of worth and identity through faith, through the divine, and however they want to identify the divine, because that looks differently for everyone, right? And so in regards to this, their idea of their God-given talent, for many, or gifts and ability, for many, it gives them this sense of worthiness. It gives them this sense of purpose, that I am here on earth for a purpose, and that I was created to kind of live it out, right? So if I am created to live it out and live it out loud, I should be more welcoming of whatever comes from that. Does that make sense? So if I am called to, as a therapist, to sit across people and allow them to share their stories while pouring into them, whatever I receive in return, I am worthy of, because I am living in my purpose. So I think a lot of folks, and my PhD was about racial inequality and God image in Black women, and understanding that the way that my participants identified their own worth was through the lens of the divine. And so racial inequality, although it did impact them in many ways, they found that their connection to the divine impacted them way more. So living out one's abilities allows them to find a connection between their purpose and how they receive love, how they receive accolades, and how they really are able to kind of live out their accomplishments.
I got one last question for you, Dr. Anderson, before we kind of close out the show and recap and really give our audience something to take away from today. You opened the show where you had the audience, you had us all close our eyes and visualize.
Yeah.
I want to turn the tables, and I want you to close your eyes and visualize the answer or your thought to this next question.
Okay.
We've been talking about imposter syndrome, the causes of it, the situations that bring it about, and how to recognize it. Mm-hmm. Hypothetically, mm-hmm. in your opinion or in your mind, is there a world scenario where imposter syndrome doesn't exist anymore? Or will it always be there in some way, shape, or form? So what does that world look like where we can eliminate, or is there a future where we can get rid of the imposter syndrome?
Is there a future? I pray there is. Yeah, I pray there is. I think what that would look like is equity for all. I think overall, as a world, it's equity for all. Like we talked about, the reason why it disproportionately affects Black women is the lack of equity. why, Black and brown folks feel imposter syndrome the most is because the lack of equity. It's this idea that we are socialized to believe we're not welcomed in certain spaces, right? And that, we are less than for certain reasons that society has created. And so because of that, we run into so many barriers, and we begin to internalize it and make it about ourselves, because it was never about us, but we take it in. That's how imposter syndrome works. That's how negativity works. It starts outside, but then we internalize it, right? And make it about us. And so, yes, I pray there is a day where that it doesn't exist. But I think a big factor would look like equity for everyone, so we don't have to even question our abilities.
So basically, we got a long way to go, I guess is what I'm saying. But there is a I guess idea that it could be eliminated, but that just takes us kind of reaching that euphoria or heaven on earth kind of situation where we are all equal and there's nothing really to compare. So thank you for that, Dr. Anderson. So this has been such a great conversation, and I know we can just keep going and we can keep going, but I know people want to get back to this Saturdays. So Dr. Anderson, what are some final thoughts that you can leave us with? And if people are struggling, do we have any resources or things that they can do to kind of reach out and kind of seek help or find help or experience that community?
Yeah. So takeaways, my favorite. So for today's takeaway, it does go back to the sense of worthiness, right? It does go back to the questions that I kind of offered earlier. Do you believe that you have to be performing to receive love, to feel valued, or to be heard? I want to challenge you today to know that you don't have to be doing to receive any of those things or to even be worthy of those things, that you are simply enough. Just being you. That's enough. That's enough. And I know oftentimes we're not told that within society, maybe within even certain close friend groups or social groups that we're in, that we feel as if we have to be doing to receive. And I just challenge you in this moment to know that you simply being you is enough. So take it in, love on yourself, and recognize that even if society doesn't get rid of imposter syndrome as a whole, that you still have the power to learn how to manage your own. All right. And so some resources that I was just quickly looking into. If you want to know more about imposter syndrome, you can visit verywellmind.com. If you are seeking support outside of not only imposter syndrome, just overall, you can always visit Psychology Today to find a therapist. You can visit Therapy for Black Girls, which is an excellent resource, but anyone can join, obviously, but just kind of seeking these resources may help you find the support that you need.
Dr. Anderson, this has been such a great conversation. I want to thank you for taking time to speak with us. And I want to thank everyone at home who's watching right now. Thank you for being here. I hope you got something out of it. And I really hope you join us next week at 11 a.m. For our next topic. So you guys take care. We'll see you next time. Bye.
For more than 40 years, Boston Scientific has relied on our spirit of relentless innovation to advance science for life. We have the privilege and responsibility to deliver higher quality, less invasive, and more accessible device solutions, and the need has never been greater. Boston Scientific technologies are used to treat roughly 30 million patients around the world each year. Across our business, our products are supported by vast clinical data, including bench testing, randomized controlled trials, and ongoing real-world evidence to ensure the highest quality products make it into the hands of our customers. And we're always looking for ways to provide even more effective therapies and solutions. We invest over $1 billion annually in research and development to sustain a robust pipeline of meaningful innovations. We continuously strengthen our manufacturing and operations capabilities with artificial intelligence and advanced microelectronics to create devices that are smaller and smarter. And we're collaborating with our medical partners and physicians to advance digital capabilities with remote device support and a broad scope of training and education programs. Advancing science for life is also about supporting our employees and the communities in which we operate. Now more than ever, we rely on our values to guide our company as a global business and as a global corporate citizen. We're working to help confront healthcare inequities and social injustice, not only with financial contributions, but through volunteer service, advocacy, and expanding market accessibility. We're also focused on environmental initiatives that move us towards our goal of becoming carbon neutral by 2030. The unmet needs are great, but the future of healthcare is bright. Our innovation centers provide a place to explore opportunities, examine solutions, and see what lies ahead for medicine. Together, we can continue the relentless pursuit of innovation to help everyone live longer, healthier lives and make a difference all over the world.